Stone by stone, tear by tear, we release and create right here. Stone by stone, tear by tear, we release and create right here. What is gone, we build upon. What is gone, we build upon. Stone by stone, tear by tear, we release and create right here. Stone by stone, tear by tear, we release and create right here. Rucha at Shekhinah, blessed are you, source of all creation, who dwells within us and around us and between us. We give great thanks and praise for our aliveness, that we might greet this day. We offer respects to indigenous peoples, all of those who have tended these lands that we inhabit long before our arrival. We offer deepest welcome to our bright and benevolent ancestors and give thanks for the elements, for the seasons in their cycles. Hi, everybody. I am Kohenet Keshira, haLev, Fife. Can you hear me okay? I see a note in the chat saying you can't. Okay, great. I'm so glad to be back here with all of you. Thank you to Adi and to Jonathan for hosting us today and for making this space available for us to sit together. I see a few names and faces that are familiar and some a little bit less so. So I'm going to tell you something about myself as a prelude to my offering. Those who know me or who have learned with me will know that lamentation is one of my favorite pastimes, and that I am a person who is in active relationship with grief. So naturally, this is one of my favorite times of year. I want to do a little teaching on grief and Tisha B'Av, and it may seem counterintuitive to place this before us as we enter into meditation, but I'm going to ask you to stick with me if you'll try it out. Let's locate ourselves in time. We are now a quarter of the way into the month of Av, nearing the 21 days between Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, or the 17th of Tammuz, and Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which will fall on this coming Sunday, as Rabbi Jonathan said. This is a time of deep grief. On the 17th of Tammuz, we remembered the Romans breaching the walls in Jerusalem. And on Tisha B'Av, we remember the destruction of the temple. Now, the 17th of Tammuz doesn't only commemorate the day when the Romans breached the walls of Jerusalem. It's also the date of the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem centuries prior. And if we go back even further, it is written that this is also the date when Moses came down from the mountain with the 10 Commandments, the first set of tablets, and found the people worshiping the golden calf. So too, Tisha B'Av is not only the anniversary of the destruction of the temple by the Romans, but also the date on which the Babylonians had burned it hundreds of years before. And in between those two dates, it marks the date when the Bar Kokhba revolt ended with defeat. And in more recent times, also marks the very same date in which Jews were officially banished from Spain in 1492. Tisha B'Av is considered to be the most mournful day on the Jewish calendar, and living through the destruction of the temple is unthinkable. I can't imagine what it would have been like for the people at the time, the trauma and chaos that engulfed. And yet, while the destruction of the temple is part of our collective Jewish narrative, many Jewish people went about their June 27th and will go about this coming Sunday without even recognizing the calendar date. So what is going on that this could be so? On one hand, it would be easy to write things off as historical occurrence. They're not so connected to our everyday experiences of life. And maybe thinking about them in the way that we remember the story of our Exodus as if we were there is too much to face. It's too hard to hold with everything else that we hold in today's world. And at the same time, I noticed yesterday that I've cried every single day since the beginning of Av. Not about the temple directly, but I've had a particular mournfulness, and maybe others have felt it too, that there's a particular gravity at this time of year. The grief rises and pools in my belly, and seemingly the only way to release it is to give it some attention. And I notice that we spiral back to this point in Jewish time. Each year, there's a little more grief. Just a little bit more each year. While some people might think of this as a cause for concern, to me it's one of the greatest gifts of Jewish tradition. If we think of the calendar as a wheel, time as a circle coming back to itself year on year, you'll notice that the month of Adar is about halfway around from the month of Av. In Jewish tradition, we learn Mishanichnas Adar Marbim Besimcha. With the arrival of Adar, gladness shall increase. And now here we are, halfway around the Jewish year, in a month hallmarked by grief. It seems to me that cosmic wisdom has designated time to give us permission to be with these emotions, to make space in each annual cycle for us to experience the full range of what is possible emotionally. Now, this isn't to say we should only be joyful in Adar, or that we have to be joyful for all of Adar, nor to say that we should only grieve in Av or only feel grief in Av. I think what it's saying is that we have permission to experience these things, and that because we move through time collectively and continually, we can do so without being fearful that we will get stuck. That we can grieve in the season of grief and know that before long, Tu B'Av will be here and that we will celebrate loving connection. And then we'll be in the month of Elul and the calendar year will begin again. So we can move into this time of grief without shame or expectation that we will hurry up and be happy again. So this is the question I ask before we close our eyes. What are you grieving in this season? What have you carried in this last spiral since last Tisha B'Av till now? Or what grief has been with you through this lifetime? What grief are you resisting? What grief are you embracing? And how might it feel to give full attention to it so that it can move? So I offer this invitation. And if it doesn't feel like a moment to be with grief, that's okay too. No one's going to ask you afterwards the answer to any of these questions. So you're also welcome to soften your gaze or close your eyes and simply be in silence and stillness if that feels more supportive. And we'll have about 10 minutes of silence, and you'll know it's time to come back when you hear me chanting again. Stone by stone, tear by tear, we release and create right here. Stone by stone, tear by tear, we release and create right here. What is gone, we build upon. What is gone, we build upon. Stone by stone, tear by tear, we release and create right here. Stone by stone, tear by tear, we release and create right here. May all that we grieve be met with release. May all that we release bring greater liberation. May the sweetness of liberation fortify us as we build towards the future. May this Tisha B'Av be potent, and may our grief give way to resilience that ripples through the generations. Kenya Hiratzon, may it be the will of the divine.
In that spirit of anticipating the grief that comes, we invite those who wish to join in reciting Kaddish now. Yitkadal, Yitash, Shirabah,
It's been a little while.
Amen.
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 We thank
Jonathan, you have to unmute.
we thank Kohenet Keshira Fife for leading us today. And we also thank our sponsors today, Corey Tratner and Larissa Hassenbush and Sammy Levin, in memory of their dear granddaughter and daughter, Shoshana Gabrielle Hassenbush Levy. We pray that this time together be one of consolation, where our collective community can be of support to them in their grief, bound up in our collective grief. And that knowing that offers them also the promises Kohenet Keshira offered us, the anticipation of ultimately being consoled and once again knowing joy. Thank you everyone for being here today and throughout this week. Anyone who'd like to stay to spend some time in chat with Kohenet Keshira is welcome to. Happy to take your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll take the next few minutes. And if not, thank you again for being here, and we look forward to seeing you next week during meditation, which will occur again at 12:30 each day, Monday through Friday. So happy to check in with you in the chat. Anyone who'd like to, Keshira, perhaps you'd like to answer this question first. What does Kohenet mean?
Sure. Kohenet means Hebrew priestess. It's the feminized version of the word Kohen. And there's a lot more that I could say, but I want to make space.
Why don't you?
Do you want me to say a little more? Sure.
Sure.
The Kohenet,
The whole of the Kohenet, the group and the movement and your spirituality.
Sure. So the Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute is an organization that's been around for 15 years. We are a clergy training program in earth-based, embodied feminist Judaism. And some of what we're doing is reclaiming voices that have been forgotten or suppressed or erased, helping people find their way to Judaism that's in our bodies and in our day-to-day lives. And I'll say collectively remembering what has been through the generations and bringing some of it back to the forefront.
Thank you, Keshira. It's such an important contribution to the Jewish world, reminding us that belief is in the body as much as in our minds or hearts, and that the experience of the divine comes through the physical world.
Absolutely. And I think connected to the teaching I offered today, I sometimes tell people that when I was a little girl, I was told that the Jewish people are the people of the book. And I came to find out as I grew older that we were once the people of the earth. And we became diasporic and learned how to make a mishkan or a sacred dwelling place in our bodies. So we became people of the earth who were also people of the body. And over time, it was not safe for people necessarily to be in their bodies. And so we moved up into our heads where we took residence and remain, most of us today, people of the book. And so part of the reclamation is remembering that we might be people of the book, but we're also people of the body and people of the earth. And we know how to source wisdom from all three of those places.
So a question comes in. Is it possible to transform intergenerational suffering into something positive? How does one begin that process?
It's a beautiful question. The first thing I want to say is that intergenerational trauma is real. Each one of us knows it. I don't have to tell you that. But if it's true, then the corollary is true too, which is that intergenerational healing is real. So what we do while we're here, the way that we change our understanding, open up greater conversation, do the work of healing our own trauma, building resilience from our grief, has an impact not only on our own experience, but on the experiences of those who we touch. And when parents ask me, how will this impact my child's Judaism, or what will they be learning? How will it change and affect their experience? I can answer that question, but I always remind them that if we do our jobs well, it will impact the experience of their great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren. That what we do is not only for us here and now, we know that, that's a teaching of Jewish tradition, but that we are planting seeds now for generations to come. In terms of what does it mean to transform intergenerational suffering into something positive, what comes to mind is actually a teaching that comes from a teacher of mine who's not Jewish, Stephen Jenkinson, who teaches that grief is a skill, and that what it means to grieve is to allow ourselves to fully love, even knowing that there is a limit or an ending. So that, the potency of that, I immediately, the first time I heard it, knew exactly what he meant. And this is what it means in my own life. I lived overseas for many years. And when I would come home, a few weeks beforehand, my dad would be so excited that I was coming home, and I would be met with great embrace, and we would have a wonderful few days together. And then a few days before I would leave, he would begin to withdraw. He would just begin just a little bit, such that by the time I was actually ready to leave, I would have to say to him, "Can I have a hug?" He'd be waving to me from the kitchen. And the first time it happened, I was puzzled. And then I realized in reflection, his grief wouldn't allow him to fully be with me because it was too hard at the end to feel the separation. So the exercise of grief is to allow ourselves to be there till the end. And to inside of that presence, know that transformation is occurring. We are left differently, even if we're the ones who's staying behind, whether the person has gotten on a plane and gone halfway around the world, or we finished a year of mourning after Shiva, that if we allow ourselves to fully be there, we are transformed by the experience.
Thank you for that fulsome response. Jan Mahler asked for the questions that you posed at the end, and they are in the chat. So just scroll up and find them in the chat. A question did come in what way were we people of the earth?
It's such a great question. So we were people of the earth, and we actually are still people of the earth. And I'll give you a few examples of what that might mean. Well, each week at the end of Shabbat, we say goodbye to our second soul, come back fully into our bodies from the high of being with the angels over Shabbat. And the way that we do that is through our body and through our senses. And one of our strongest senses is a sense of smell. Whether it's a cinnamon quill or a sachet of spices, we are smelling what is of the earth. We build our memory places for our beloveds by stacking stones or engraving stones and putting them on the earth. When we cast away on Rosh Hashanah, we take ourselves to moving water and we give those breadcrumbs to that which flows, that which is held by the earth. And on I could go from there. Virtually every holiday that we have has connection to the earth in some way. Most of our ritual is connected to the earth. It can be fun to remember and to create new ways.
Thank you, Keshira. You suggested early on in your talk a variety of reasons that Tisha B'Av and grieving might have passed from our collective practice. And I'd just like to add that it's a very American response as well. Becoming more and more American, we took on the optimism of America and sort of left everything behind. And I'd add that I think that there was a fear of entering into too deeply the grief of the Shoah, or the Holocaust. And so there was this agreement in some way that we all made that we weren't going to enter into grief. And this stuff about Tisha B'Av and grieving was, that's so old school, that's old country. We don't cry, we laugh, we dance, we live our lives, we live affirmatively. And we forgot how much grieving needs to be part of life, all of life. And that having it as ritual is a way of training. So thank you for bringing this to us. We'll take this last question. How do we grieve the pending losses? Yeah. In my case, that we have to put our beautiful 15-year-old pup down tomorrow. We have to move. Not necessarily Jewish, but deep sadness that brings up old losses that are intergenerational.
Shamati, Lori, I hear you so much in this. If we understand grief as a skill or as a practice, the grief doesn't begin after a death or after a loss, right? It begins well before that. In fact, retrospectively, I realized that every time an adult used to say, oh, the kids are growing up so fast, right? It's a praise, but the kids aren't actually doing so much to make their growing up happen, right? They're just getting on with their playing and their learning and their doing. And really inside that is the lamentation that they won't be small for so much longer. And what does that signify for us? What does that mean about our stage of life? What does that mean about the good times while we're all together before they go into the world? And so we can grieve in joy. That's the first thing. That the grieving can be active and intermingled with the joy. Rabbi Jonathan's point about leaving behind the grief or not going there is also a survival mechanism, right? Of fitting in and being safe. We can still be in the world while we grieve, and it's rightful to give a time to grief. I think we're in a culture which, as soon as a person sheds one tear, someone runs with a Kleenex, right? And the subtext of the Kleenex says, please stop crying in my presence. I'm uncomfortable with it. I want you to stop. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. It's rightful for us to have time to be with our grief. And if we make strong communities and remain connected to one another, we can do that without being fearful that we'll get stuck there. That if we let ourselves grieve, the whole world's going to move on and we're going to be left behind, or we won't be able to get back out, right? If we are connected to one another and look after one another, we're not only witnessed in our grief, but if we find that we're having a hard time getting out, we can ask for help. So there are many rituals of grief which might be relevant, especially when we're letting go of a beloved pup. And I think my encouragement would be to remember to share stories now and always, so that pup lives on in memory, and also to let the feelings move like waves, right? Like the ocean moves away, it moves. We don't get to contain it. And so too we are the same.
That's great. And so to conclude and to answer Susan's question, Ken Yehirat song is essentially, so may it be. Thank you, Keshira, Kohenet Keshira haLev Fife, for teaching us today and leading us. Thank you, Adi, for being there at the ready. And thank you, everyone, for sharing in this week of meditation. Shabbat Shalom, and see you next week.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.